All right, that is our cue to get started. So first of all, again, welcome to everybody to our first webinar of the year. We just want you to know how thankful we are to have you here with us today, committing to spend your time with us. We are super excited about today's webinar on increasing emotional intelligence through authenticity, and just super excited to kick off the year with an inspiring message. As some of you may already know, David has more than 35 years of experience as a family therapist, workshop facilitator, lecturer, and advisor to leadership executives all over the world. He's worked with CEOs in companies of all sizes in all industries and presented to countless organizations over the last several decades. He is a best-selling author and respected thought leader in the leadership community. Most recently, David is grateful to have been appointed to serve on the board of the Wayfinders Wellness Society, an organization that provides a safe space and community for military and first responders that are suffering from PTSD. David's passion for helping people connect to their most authentic self is evident to everybody that meets him, and he has a genuine gift for connecting people with the best versions of themselves. If you're looking for support or guidance or inspiration to help you create a more accountable, engaged, fulfilled, successful team, David can help. So thank you again for joining us this morning. It's always inspiring and encouraging to see leaders that are committed to learning and growing and showing up as the best versions of themselves. So without further ado, here is David.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We are delighted to offer this to you, and we do this every month, and we're just grateful for you taking the time. I know our demands and our time are great, and I just really appreciate you investing this time with us. We keep it on webinar format to keep the dialogue. What the agenda will be, I'm going to talk for about an hour, maybe a little less, and then we're going to have a Q&A for half an hour. So the formal part of this, the recording part of this, will be for an hour, and the recording will be available for anybody who missed it, or if you want to circulate it, feel free to do that. It'll be on my YouTube channel. And then for anybody who can stick around for half an hour, I'd like to have the dialogue. I turn off the share slides, turn off the recording, and we just have a dialogue with each other about what you learned and what questions might surface. So it's great to be here. And thank you, Kristen, for your usual passion and energy. All right. I want to be transparent with you right up front and let you know that a big part of our agenda is to introduce you to the Authentic Leadership Academy, which will be in May 30th to June 2nd. We're just working out the details. It's going to be in partnership with the University of Calgary. It'll be a hybrid model, so you can call in or you can come in person. And if you're interested in that, Marg, my amazing VP of Client Care, who's on the call today, will be putting her contact information in. But if you just contact Marg or leave your information in the chat room, we'll send you that information. And we're also starting our next session in our SAGE forums in late February. So that information will be available to you too. We can answer some questions in the question and answer period. All right, let's get into the content. We're going to go on a journey today, as always. And these will be the three themes. I can't tell you that this is going to be a linear agenda, but these will be the three themes that we're going to cover off today. We're going to give you a very brief EQ overview. I'm imagining there are people on this call that are much more familiar with EQ as a model and are much better experts at it. It's been a background theme of all of my work into emotional intelligence, but it's not something that I would say that I'm an expert in, but I certainly have some perspective on it, and I'll give you some of my perspective right off the bat in terms of what I view as EQ. Then we're going to talk about authenticity and EQ, and what does authenticity have to do with emotional intelligence? And then I'm going to talk about strategies for increasing your EQ through authenticity. So first of all, let me give you a definition of what emotional intelligence is. It's defined, and there's probably many definitions. This best one I could find is defined as the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. So the best way for me to tell you about my introduction to EQ is to give you a little backstory here. So this is my father. And my first experience, this was back in the 70s, long before the language of EQ even came into the lexicon of organization, certainly, or life. But my dad introduced me to some very interesting people. Now, I grew up on a little farm. This is my dad. He's kind of a cross between a social worker and a farmer and an artist. He's just a beautiful human being. Struggled with a great deal of mental illness in his life, and just was a tremendous model. Anybody who's been in any of my teachings knows how much I respect and honor my dad. Now, in Red Deer, we were north of Red Deer. Now, Red Deer, for anybody who's coming in from afar, is in the middle of, well, it's really in the southern part of Alberta in Western Canada. And we lived in a little farm about a half an hour north of Red Deer. Now, in Red Deer at the time, there was an institution called Deer Home. Now, in 1997 or 1977, it changed its name to Michener Center. And about 7 or 8 years after that, it was closed down. It was an institution that opened in 1923, and it was an institution to house adults and children with mental disabilities. And what my dad would do is he would go in and they would allow and support their residents to come and work in communities. And my dad would go in and pick up these fellows and bring them out to the farm, and they would work on our farm. And they were the most amazing, incredible. Most of them probably had an IQ of less than 50. They were mostly Down syndrome men, big, strong men that worked very, very hard, hardest workers you can imagine. They just never tired. And they were the most loving, caring men. And in that, I can still remember them. We didn't ever take pictures in those days. I wish I could, except, a little bit here with my dad, but we just didn't take pictures the way we do today. I'm sure I'd have pictures. I'd love to introduce, they weren't just men with mental disabilities. It was Henry and Morgan and Paul and Bob. I just remember these individuals. They just lit up our whole family. And I was introduced to this notion that there's more to life, there's more to the world and there's more values than just intellectual ability and economics. There was another dimension that I was introduced to in my upbringing. I didn't even know and didn't have a language for it, but looking back, there's a intelligent quotient, there's emotional quotient, and then I would call what I was introduced here to LQ, which would be love quotient. These guys would be over the top. They'd be well over 200 if you could assess their love quotient. They just had an open heart. And I was introduced to this notion of humanity very early on in my life. This was the early seeds that were planted. Now, in theory, the 4 keys to cultivate emotional intelligence, which is to open up your emotional and your emotional side, there's really 4 keys. And we could spend a whole day learning this, and I'm not an expert in this, but basically what the emotional intelligence folks would tell you is about self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and the ability to influence relationship management. So we're going to focus just for today in terms of self-awareness. What does it really mean to have self-awareness as it relates to authenticity? Now, I'm going to suggest there are 4 aspects of self-awareness that we're going to cover in our webinar this morning. First of all, we're going to talk about strengths. It's being aware of your strengths, being aware of how you connect with people. How do you connect with yourself? How do you connect with others? Blind spots. What are the areas in your life that you're blind to? And this is one of the most challenging parts. This will sabotage a leader more than anything else, because we don't know what we don't know. Now, we could spend, in the academy, we spend a half a day on the darker side of ourselves, on the shadow side. I'm just going to give you a very quick introduction to looking at your blind spots, particularly when it comes to when you get triggered emotionally. What do you do with those, and how does it impact people around you? And then we're going to spend a good part, probably half of this webinar, in terms of understanding what authenticity is. And authenticity will run through the theme of all of this in terms of increasing your self-awareness through authenticity. Now, how do you develop this? Essentially, folks, it's through education, through reflection, and through feedback. So I'm going to give you the education piece today. But again, how do you know you have to do some self-reflecting in terms of building self-awareness. But again, you don't know what you don't know. So we also need to be open for a lot of feedback. And so I'm going to do the education piece and give you some structure around self-awareness. But my invitation to you, and this is what we do in our SAGE forums, is that we really build self-awareness, and it's integral to our whole work around having you get feedback from each other, from trusted colleagues and friends. All right. I just want to make a note of, I have no vested interest in these links. This is formerly the Strength Finders work, and some of you have taken the strength. So this is all about strengths, right? So this is these are now what used to be the Strength Finder exercise. These are what's called the Clifton Strength assessments. And Kristen's going to post all of these links, these 3 links, onto the website. If you want to go deeper with this, I have no vested interest in you taking this, but if you really want to develop an awareness of your strengths through a very careful inventory, please, this is just a tool that's available for you in the marketplace. All right, let's talk about my perspective of strengths. So I think if you've been in any of my workshops, you understand that I probably will speak always about your ikigai, your reason for being. It's understanding your gifts, that which you're good at, your passion, that which you love, and then your contribution, that which your organization needs. And when those 3 are intersected, that is your sweet spot. That is your ikigai. Now, some of us have our ikigai at work. We call that a vocation. Some of us have our ikigai away from work, and we have a job. And our real ikigai is away from work. That's called an avocation, when you don't get paid for your ikigai. And then some of us can have an avocation and a vocation, because you can go back and forth. But it's very important, and this has very clear business imperative, has very clear leadership imperative. So I'll show you that in a minute. So your gifts are, what do you do well that you don't remember learning? And there's a whole process. And again, you can look up those links if you really want to explore what those gifts are. The other way to do it, if you don't want to pay to do an inventory, it's not terribly expensive, but if you don't want to pay to do an inventory, just find 20 people who know you and that you respect and ask them, what do you see as my gifts? And you take a very careful inventory, because our gifts, the interesting thing about gifts is they're so close to us, we don't see them. Just like we don't see it, it can really be a blind spot that we're not aware of what our gifts are. But it's very, very difficult to really lead when we don't know what our gifts are, because what part of leadership, authentic leadership, is, in terms of EQ, is to create places where people can use their talents. And if you're not aware of your own gifts, it's very difficult to guide people to where you haven't been. Now, your passion is that which you do, that when you do it, you lose all track of time. So how do you know what your passion is, and how do you intersect that? And my premise is we need to fit people, don't fix people. So we've spent far too much time in the leadership field finding people's weaknesses. And maybe it comes from our schooling days when we focused on our weaknesses and we brought those report cards home and we got 5 B's and 1 F, and we'd focus on the F. Maybe that F just wasn't our strength. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue, develop, strengthening our weaknesses, but you'll get far more return on the investment of finding people's strengths and aligning with people's strengths than you will finding their weaknesses and trying to strengthen their weaknesses. And it's one of the things that leadership has really fallen back on in the last generation. I think we're getting smarter with the Gallup organization helping us see the value of strengths and focusing on strengths. And you know what, if there's not an alignment here, maybe we move people out, but and we help people move beyond the organization. But my passion would be that we create organizations where people all live their strength. Now, what does this have to do with leadership? Well, I will share with you what my strengths are. I communicate, I connect, I consult, and I coach. Those are basically in my sweet spot. Those are things that, what I'm doing right now. And you won't get burned out. I will not get burned out doing those things. It's when I work outside of my sweet spot that I get tired. As we say, burnout is not about hard work. It's about heartache. And you will not get tired when you're in your sweet spot. Well, you'll get tired, but that's a good tired. Bad tired is when you're operating outside of your sweet spot. And none of us can have a job where we only do what's in our sweet spot. We all have to have some of our area outside of that. But if we're spending too much time outside of that sweet spot, we are going to get exhausted and depleted and burned out. Okay. So what does this have to do with leadership? So this would be in all of any team that you're on. And it could be if you're a CEO in a company, it could be your whole organization. But I'm going to suggest that probably most of you run teams or are parents, and you can apply this to your family or on a board. Each of you on a team, each member of that team has a piece that they're offering the puzzle. And again, the goal would be to have everybody living their sweet spot, their ikigai on that team. That's where you get the most value from your people. And this is what authentic leadership is it's really identifying what that sweet spot is with people, and not just giving people a job, but really identifying that alignment, that making sure that fit is there. I always talk about accountability, but before you talk about accountability, you first of all have to get people aligned with their gifts. Oftentimes we don't have an accountability problem, we have an alignment problem. So in my particular case, how do you know what those pieces are? Well, the only way to know what those pieces are, you have to have a clear purpose and you have to have a vision, a 10 or a 5-year vision. And then you say, what do we need on our team to get us there? That's what, when I work with entrepreneurs, that's essentially what I do. But it's not just an entrepreneurial challenge. You can do this in your own life. You can do this right now in your own life, where you can begin to say, what is your own personal purpose? What is your own personal 10-year vision? Maybe you're going to stay working in an organization. What are the people around you that you need to support you to live your purpose and your vision? Okay. Now, I will share with you our vision as a company, as a firm, is that we want to make the world a place where people wake up each day loving the life that they live. And I will give credit to Kristen, who helped us craft that purpose statement. Okay. Now, what's our 10-year vision is that we want to create a global community of authentic difference makers. And that in 10 years, we want to create this kind of community where people are attending conferences, where they're attending these academies and SAGE groups and SAGE forums. Now, in order to do that, there are certain skills that we need on our team to build that. And if there's one weakness that I've had many, but one of the weaknesses that I've had is that I try to do too much on my own, and I don't really let go and work as a team. I've been talking about teamwork for the last 40 years. I can tell people how to build a good team. And it's one of the, as we say, what we are best at teaching is what we are most in need of developing. And I have not worked well in a team. But what I've discovered, in order to live that vision, these are the different aspects of our team: marketing and social media, sales, executive assistant. And by the way, I believe every professional needs an executive assistant. If you don't have an executive assistant, you are one. Okay. There's me: communicate, connect, consult, coach, client care, and facilitators, and a business development person. I am not a business development person. It's been one of my weaknesses that I have not brought a team of a business development in, and it's limited. I've had some impact, but it's limited the amount of impact because I'm not a development guy. I'm not a strategy guy. Now, what's happened for me is that, and this comes back to my work around authenticity, is I brought business development people into my firm, but then what happens is I lose my voice. So then I fire them and I say, I'm going back to just being what I do best. Now, any entrepreneur in this room understands that you do everything. When you have a startup, when you have a company that you start up, you do everything. And what happens when you do everything? And by the way, I just want to acknowledge our client, our VP of Client Care, who takes amazing care of our clients when they call in, is Marg Barr. And she's on this call. And anybody who hasn't connected with Marg, she will take care of you if you want to reach out, if you have any questions at all. She'll leave her contact information on there and she'll take care of you. My dear wife, who's been my executive assistant for the last, as long as we've been married, 35 years, she has taken meticulous care of me. I'm not sure it's her passion any longer, but it certainly is her gift to do that. We have Kristen here, who looks after all of our marketing and social media and does a masterful job. And we have a group of facilitators that we have here, that some of whom are on the call. And we are setting up a sales process, not something that we have had. Marg has done that much of the selling, but it's not in her sweet spot to go out and make cold calls and have strategies around selling and expanding our market. She takes very good care of the people that come to us. But one of the things that we have to make sure we do is that we make sure that every single one of those people on our team is in their ikigai. And that's on me as the leader to ensure that that happens. Now, what happens when you do everything? And this is one point I want to make. In the entrepreneurial world, we reach what Dan Sullivan calls a ceiling of complexity. If you do everything, and you start off doing everything, and you'll be successful for a while, but then you'll level off and you can work 24/7 and you won't have any more success. It just reaches this sense of you can't do anything more. And so the way that an entrepreneur builds their business and is fulfilled in their business is to find their sweet spot and delegate everything else, and find people to fill each of these roles to achieve your purpose and achieve your vision. So that's ultimately what my work has been, is to focus on what I do best, but make sure that we build a team that will take care of the rest. Okay, so that's my thoughts around strengths, is just really knowing what your strengths are. Now, let me move to this next point. I hope you'll have some questions. And by the way, if you have any questions as we go along, please you're welcome to put them in the chat room as well. And Kristen will pick those up, and I'll respond to them at the end. All right, connections. So let's talk about connections in terms of self-awareness. My whole point these days is that everybody interacts, but very few people connect. And this is obviously, I'm dating myself here, but this is the age that we've been moving into this last decade plus, where we're getting more and more attached to these devices that are great tools to stay connected, but I'm not sure that they're great tools to get connected to begin with. Okay. I mean, we wouldn't be here today without them, but every strength becomes a weakness sooner or later. So we have a question in our team that we answer every week in our team meetings. Before we start an operational meeting, we always go around the circle and we ask each other, how are you feeling? Now, this is a very fundamental question for self-awareness and for in terms of emotional intelligence, is to just know how you are feeling at this moment. Now, there's two reasons why people have a difficult time answering that question. First of all, and this gets into authenticity, many of us were trained that it's not safe or it's not acceptable to have certain feelings. For example, men, and I know this is changing in our culture, but men historically, certainly in my generation, were not allowed to have feelings like pain, like grief, like fear, like insecurity. It was seen as a weakness to show your feelings. So we shut those feelings off and we just turn them into anger. So it's easier for us to get angry. And many people on this call, men and women, have an easier time just going to anger or irritability. And we're disconnected. We cannot get connected to each other until we can get connected to ourselves. And the problem with devices is that we live in our head. I'm assuming some of you on this call are multitasking. We invite you not to do that, but I can't stop. I don't know what you have going on, but I'm going to guess with 99% of surety, if you're sitting there multitasking, you're in your head. You're thinking. And this is where devices take you. Now, nothing wrong with being in your head, but I am inviting you to get into your heart. And if you want to connect with people, it isn't in your head. You can connect at an intellectual level, but if you really want to build community and engage people and lead and inspire people, you got to connect with their heart. You got to get to people's heart, folks, before you ask them for a hand, okay? Now, anybody who's taken a Myers-Briggs understands these dichotomy. I want to just focus on this perspective. The second reason why people have a difficult time getting into their feelings is because they have an orientation toward thinking. And I mean, this isn't a Myers-Briggs presentation, but I think anybody that knows anything about Myers-Briggs knows that there's this continuum between thinking and feeling. Now, I am a feeler by nature. I am an emotional person. I teach emotions, It's natural. It's my first language. I was raised with, and you know what? I don't think it was. I don't think it was developed. It was developed, but it wasn't created in me. It was in me right from day one. I was a very sensitive kid right from day one. Part of it was my response to trauma, but that I'm just an emotional person. So what's the advantage of an emotional person is that I connect relatively easily. I can connect with audiences. I can build those relationships. The downside is that I can get very prone to getting depression. It's been very interesting for me because what growth is in life is bringing balance into these. Not that you'll have a 50-50 balance, but if you're 90% feeling and 10% thinking, as you increase your ability to think, maybe you move that to 70-30. That's a growth opportunity. I can tell you, the downside to being a feeler is I'm very prone to getting anxious and I'm very prone to getting depressed. Now, part of that is biological, what I inherited from my dad, but I can tell you working in rational, thinking-driven organizations, I say, if you work in the oil patch in Calgary, you will end up with 90% of those executives are ISTJs. They are thinking, introverted, sensing, and judging. And that's how you build a rational company. And having spent time in these high thinking organizations, it's actually been good for my mental health because learning how to think differently, using my brain has been helpful in terms of bringing balance to my own spirit. Now, it can be taken too far. And if I compromise my feeling side and just try to pretend to be a thinker and getting into my rational side, what happens is that then I get off balance the other way and I'm not honoring my essence, my true innate essence. Okay. Now I like to bug Kristen on this call. She is brilliant. And she's got tremendous spark and she's got tremendous energy, but she's she's a good thinker. She doesn't lead with her emotions. And we absolutely we don't need everybody like me. If you got everybody like me on a team, what do you need a team for? So, but when we start our meeting, how do you feel? What I'll get sometimes from Kristen is, well, my week is going great. And I keep bugging her. I say, well, your week is not a feeling. So what's the feeling underneath the fact that you're weak? So 2 days ago, I usually will challenge her and we'll have a good laugh on our team. It's been really useful to build a team with us. But 2 days ago, Kristen said, so when we went around the room, Kristen said, I feel strong. Well, now that's an emotion expressed by a thinker. Because I don't know, as an emotional person, I don't know what strong means. I don't know if you're mad and you just are strong enough. You're saying, I'm mad, but I'm not letting that anger take over me, or I'm afraid and I'm not letting that take over me, or I'm feeling confident. What does mad mean? Or what does strong mean? So this is why when we drill down a little deeper, it just enriches the conversation. So what I have here is a feeling wheel, because many of us just don't have a good language for emotion. And one of the things that you can do is at least say, what color are you today? What color are you at this moment? It can change. It might have changed in the last half an hour. What emotion do you have? And where are you? Now, why do you bother doing this? Because this is the doorway to connection, is to really pay attention. How are you feeling? You don't need to fix it. You don't need to straighten it out. You don't need to make it any different. What we say in our team meeting is we just go around, nobody fixes it. However, if people are in the dark blue or the purple or the red, and they're a bit distressed, what we'll do is we'll give them the space to say, do you need to take time in our team meeting? Most of the time people will say, no, this is something I'm just dealing with on my own. But I just need to express and be honest about what's going on in the team. Nothing the team is doing that's creating this. This is the space that I'm in. Now, if that happens, I will reach out to them and I will, on a one-to-one basis, say, do you want to pursue this more? It's okay not to, but we want to create a space where people can share how they feel. Okay. How are you feeling today is the question. And again, what color would you give yourself at this moment? What words you can do? Now, my bias, because I have a language to emotion, and I'm not saying that everybody has to be emotional to be okay. If we got engineers on this call, I'm really glad that you're building our bridges, not me, right? So we need thinkers in the world. So we're just moving the needle a little bit to have you open your heart as a thinker. And as an emotional person, you probably want to, one of the things that would help you, probably, that if you're anything like me, that'll help you to be around thinkers. This is, by the way, why we get married to people that are opposite to us, because this is what we have the greatest opportunity to learn. And we also, it becomes our biggest battleground, because we try to change each other rather than embrace each other's differences and know that we all have value. But the more precise you can be, the better the connection. This is why I drill down to get to the bottom of what people are really feeling, not because I have to fix it or do anything with it. Just like we can't fix each other's feelings, you can't fix your own feelings. It's just a matter of being there. Now, this is my premise around emotions. I treat emotions like a child in a back seat in a car seat. So I don't know if you've ever had, I'm assuming most of you, whether it's your own kids or if you're an aunt or an uncle, have had a niece or a nephew or one of your kids or grandkids sitting in the back seat in a car seat, and they start to cry. What do? You stop the car, and if you possibly can, and you open the car door, you get out of the car, you hold the child, and you attend to their emotion. What's going on? You stop the vehicle and you attend. And then you are with them. Now, then when you resolve that feeling, when they settle down, you put them back in the car seat, and you go back in the car seat. You don't put the child in the car seat. You don't have to run your life by what you feel. You don't want your emotions in the car seat. So I was coaching an executive just yesterday, and she was talking about how she felt dismissed in one of her executive meetings by one of her colleagues on her team. And I said, how'd you feel about that? And then she went into complaining. She said, I just can't believe that this person would treat me like this. And she went on a bit of a tirade. Now, she needed a little time to vent, but I reminded her after she had vented, describing describing your colleague is not an emotion. It's not an emotion. It's a description of a feeling. It's a description of your thinking, but it's not an emotion. So what's the emotion? I was hurt. I was hurt. Now we're getting to an emotion. Now, if first of all, one of the ways that you can show hurt is that's a primary feeling. You can get mad, and you can just get judgmental back, and you can push back. That's one way, is to get mad. But that actually is a defense against feeling what you're actually feeling. You can create a fight and a drama, or you can create a drama with yourself where you just bury it and push it inside and deny it and not be aware that you're feeling sad or that you're feeling hurt in this case. And what we often find is that people complain after the meeting, and they go to a third party and they complain, but it's actually a defense against connecting with your own emotion. Complaining is not an emotion, and it won't heal the situation. So what do you do in a situation like that? What would you call high emotional intelligence when you get hurt? Is that you acknowledge 30 seconds in that room inside of yourself. You're not doing anything with the hurt yet. You're just acknowledging it. I feel hurt by that comment. I felt offended by that comment. I felt dismissed is a feeling. It was off. Now you stop in that moment and say, what's the appropriate response? It might be to voice it in the team or in the relationship. It might be appropriate to say, you know what, I felt dismissed. And maybe you've created a team environment where you can be open and honest and upfront about that. Or you might say, it's not the appropriate time to deal with it. I'll take it offline, but I'm not going to suppress it. I'm just going to still be friendly toward it. I don't need to fix it. I might get support elsewhere, and then I'm going to take it offline. Now, I might come back the next day or the next hour once I've gotten myself grounded with it and I can share my feeling. But the most important thing is I'm going to acknowledge it and make it okay to have that emotion. That's what emotional intelligence is about. Now, I would also recommend Brene Brown's work around the Atlas of the Heart. This is a very different book than she's written. This is like an encyclopedia. If you want to get into exploring emotions, it's like an encyclopedia of all the significant emotions in your life. You want to understand them, acknowledge them, dig deeply into it. It's a very different book. It's kind of like a resource book. It's a beautiful book for digging more deeply into your emotions if you want to understand that better in terms of your connections. Your blind spots. Let me just say a few things around blind spots. And this is what will lead into this whole work around authenticity. So first of all, your blind spots. What is a catalyst? What is a catalyst for a strong emotional reaction in you? So what triggers these emotions? Now, I'm going to share with you some of my triggers that I have come to know through feedback and again, through education and through self-reflection. Here's what triggers me when I don't feel in control, because I had so little control as a kid. When I don't feel in control, I'll get triggered by that. When I don't feel safe. I grew up in a family where I was loved and encouraged and supported, but there was addiction and there was mental illness in my home. And so there were rages periodically. And so I was always on guard. So when I don't feel safe, that's a trigger for me. When someone I care about gets hurt, when I'm not seen as reliable, the big thing for me is I hate being late. I was coming over to the office and I started to get very anxious because I was afraid of being late and being unprepared and not looking efficient. And when I don't feel that my efforts make an impact, these are my triggers. And so self-awareness comes when my realization, when this happens, when I get triggered. So how do I know I get triggered? I get anxious. I get tense. I get overly controlling. I micromanage. I get impatient. I get critical, and I overprotect. So these are some of my triggers that is important for me to be aware of. And for those of you who have sat through my presentations before, know that I do a lot of work around the F state and the C state. And if you get nothing out of this presentation, just ask yourself, how do you know when you're in the F state? When you're in that anxious fight, flight, freeze, or freaking out? Or when, and it's my premise that we all get there. It's a human biological response when we get stressed, but you cannot lead there. You know, we say when you get promoted to being a leader, you don't get more power. What you get is more accountability. And one of your accountabilities is that you cannot lead from the F state. You will create an environment that is not safe when you're leading from the F state, and you better be aware of that, and you better be open to getting feedback about that. Your job as a leader, my job as a leader, is to get, it would be irresponsible for me to come to this webinar today in the F state. I might have been in the F state, which I did when I came over here. I was anxious, but I needed to take 5 minutes to get into the C state, because that's where I need to lead from. And it's not your team's job to get you out of that F state. We have to take personal responsibility so that we can share when we're in the F state, but not be in it. We can share about it. So what is your own process from going from the F state to the C state? It is a sign of high emotional intelligence when you are very clear and precise about what your process is. And so I will offer to you my process. It's not the only process. This is actually Tara Brach's process, who's a Buddhist meditation teacher. And this is her process that I've borrowed. But I would suggest that we all need to be very explicit. Recognize when you're in there. The problem is when you're in there, you don't know that you're in there because it's in a different part of your brain. Being stressed is in a different part of your brain than your higher functioning modalities. So you need to know, you have to be very disciplined around recognizing when you're in that F state. Step back, accept and appreciate it. There's nothing wrong with being in the F state, but investigate it. Now you can investigate it. This investigation can take 30 seconds in the middle of a meeting when you get triggered, or if you need to just set it aside, and say, I'll investigate it later tonight, or you can step away for 5 minutes and investigate it, talk it through, make a phone call, sit with some quiet time and investigate it. But the important thing is to return to the people who triggered you and say, what is the appropriate response? Do I need to deal directly with them? Or the last point here is just non-attachment, which ultimately we have to let it go. So that is some of my thoughts around, and we also need to know, where do you need to go to get centered? I know I need to be around animals, and particularly I need to be around horses. Horses and dogs are very healing for me. I relate very well. I've been raised with horses. I've been around horses all my life, and horses are prey animals. And like I identify very much with them. They're very attuned to the people around them. So I can get a lot of feedback from horses. If they're nervous around me, I know there's something going on within me. And they're a great tool for me to come back to my authentic self. Now that leads to my final point that I want to spend the rest of our session on today. And where does the ability to influence people come from? And think of the people who have influenced your life. Does it come from their position, or does it come from their presence? And I think it's a pretty obvious statement that we can't use our position to influence people. It's our ultimately, the position is a tool. I remember meeting a CEO once who told me he never promotes anybody in his organization until he's watched you work in a nonprofit organization, volunteer nonprofit organization. I want to see if you can influence people without a title. And if you can't influence people without a title, there's no way I'm going to give you a title. So what is authenticity? The greatest privilege of a lifetime is to be who you are. And what authenticity is, the essence of who we're born with. Now, in my academies, we get into this in much, much more detail. But basically what we mean is, by the essence, by the way, it's just an excuse to introduce you to my grandson, who's now 16, by the way, driving a car, if you can believe it. But anyway, the whole notion of authenticity is it's beauty, truth, and love in its essence. And when we are authentic, we are who we are. The problem is we grow up in this world that we are taught to be somebody that we're not. And so we pretend in order to fit in. And what we do is that we hide, or what we call in the psychology field, we disassociate from our authentic self. We disassociate from our body, which is our natural, authentic mechanism for understanding what's going on inside of us. We downplay or cover up certain aspects of ourselves out of fear that being different or associating with someone different will prevent you from feeling safe. And so in order to feel safe, we separate. And that is the human experience. That's the human journey, is how do we return? And I always was critical of why we separate until I began to think about it in a different way. I don't know about fish. I've never talked to a fish, but I'm imagining that a fish doesn't know it's in the ocean. But if you take that fish and put it in a boat, then you begin to realize this is not your authentic self. This is not where I belong. And then when you get thrown back in the ocean, and then you'll begin to appreciate that ocean. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I'm imagining that that would be true. Just like you remove yourself from your authentic self, then you begin to appreciate, now it's time to return. So as we return to our authentic self, we connect with ourself, and we connect with our nature. And our emotions are the pathway to connect with your nature. Now, the Harvard Business Review Leadership and Organization Development Journal has lots of research. If you just Google the research, but basically what they'll tell you is that an employee's perception of authentic leadership is the strongest prediction of job satisfaction, and can have a positive impact on work-related attitudes. Most employees believe authenticity in the workplace leads to better relationships with colleagues, higher levels of trust, greater productivity, and a more positive working environment. Lots of research to suggest this and to support this. Here's the problem that I have. If you take a look at most leaders, and it's stuff that's written on LinkedIn, it's articles on social media, it's academic articles, you know what they'll tell you about authentic people? They'll give you a list of things that authentic people do. And it drives me crazy. You talk about being a trigger, it absolutely drives me crazy. Now, why would it drive me crazy? If you look at this list, okay, Now, you can look at this list on the outside and say, well, that's a pretty good list. Who can argue with this list? They don't pass judgment. They're generous. They treat everybody with respect. They aren't motivated by material things. They aren't driven by ego, and they aren't hypocrites. This came, by the way, came right out of an HBR article. So that's what we know about authentic people. Well, you know what I get ticked off at? Guess what? There are days that I don't do those things. There's days that I pass judgment. I'm overtired. I'm going to pass judgment. There's days that I'm too depleted to be generous. There's days I don't treat people with respect. I want to, but I don't do it perfectly. I'm not motivated. There's times that I'm motivated by material things. I love material things. I don't want to be spending my whole life, and I'm certainly less motivated. I'm getting rid of most of the material things in my life these days that I spent my first half of my life collecting, but I love material things. I'm driven by my ego, especially when I'm insecure, and I'm a hypocrite at times. It's far easier to teach this stuff than it is to actually put it into practice. I'd much rather tell you to be accountable than to be accountable. So does that make me inauthentic? Stop and think about that. Now I'm not authentic. So you know what I'm going to be? I'm going to be those things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really try to be those things, and then it's not going to be authentic because I'm trying. It doesn't come from my nature. So how do we resolve that? And this is, I all of a sudden feel a sense of shame because now I'm not authentic. Well, I am authentic. I'm going to suggest what overrides all of this is honesty, is awareness that, you know what, there are times that I am judgmental. And I want to be, now, if I can be honest and open and friendly with myself and my humanity, then I can be open for feedback. Marg gave me some feedback just a couple of weeks ago, my vice president of client care. And she said, Dave, I felt dismissed by you. You overwrote. I was trying to explain something, and my need to have control and get the meeting done, and my expediency, my need for efficiency overrode the need to be expressed. And I was not compassionate and respectful in that moment. And she pushed me on it. And it was very difficult to hear that, but it was very important for me to hear that. And hopefully I apologized and I made amends, and I hope to learn from it. But we're all going to make mistakes. The important thing is to be honest. Now, if you're, for example, you live in an organization that values respect and you don't care about being respectful, you don't want to be respectful, you don't want to be generous, you don't care if you judge people, then get the heck out of the organization. You don't belong there because you're not aligned with the values. But let's give us a break to say, who in a civil society doesn't want to be those things? The important thing is to be rigorous and self-honest about this, and honest with the people that we work and live with. So my little list here, you can come up with your own list. How do you know when you're being inauthentic, when you're exhausted? You know the difference between good tired and bad tired? We all get tired. And, at the end of the week, when you're tired, ask yourself, is it a good tired or a bad tired? Exhausted means you're working too much out of your ikigai. You're not living authentically. Strained, impatient, resistant, anxious, isolated, disengaged, disconnected, stressed, empty, and it's heavy. Be aware, stop, and notice. Pay attention. This is a big strategy with authenticity, is to allow quietness in our life to inform us what is really going on inside of us. How are we feeling? And again, feelings will open the doorway to this. Safe, trusting, open, honest, calm, focused. You're in the flow, accepting, connected, joyful, peaceful, fulfilled, and light. So what would your list be? What would your list be? Your inner compass in the side of your heart. What would you say your list would be to know when you're authentic? So my whole point around authenticity comes from Leonard Cohen. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Just be willing to acknowledge the crack in you. Acknowledge what you don't see in yourself. Be open to be human, and then be willing to make amends and change the action. But let's not try to walk around, try to have this illusion of perfection and turn us all into inauthentic people. You know, sincerity is derived from the Latin sign, which is without, and cera, wax, or without wax. According to one popular explanation, dishonest sculptors in ancient Rome and Greece would cover flaws in their work with wax to deceive the potential buyer. Therefore, a sculpture without wax would mean honesty in its imperfection. I love this. I think another word for authentic is sincere. We're not afraid to hide. We don't cover up and pretend that we have those cracks. And then what happens is those cracks turn into gold and we can transform our life. Okay. So folks, my bottom line message here is stay weird. Stay weird. I'm not talking about the kind of weird where you paint your hair green so you can be like everybody else who paints their hair green. What I'm talking about is to listen, listen to your unique, authentic self, because that is what the world needs, for you to bring your true nature into the world, into this world, and be of service to other people. Let me just finish off with this notion. My whole notion of the other Everest, the book that I've written, is that we're all on this, that there's two mountains to climb in life. And the first mountain is the mountain up. And it's where we're building our reputation and our achievements, and we're impression management, making a good impression in the world and keeping score. And we have material success and we measure up. And then on that climb up the mountain, we're going to get whacked on the side of the head and knocked right off of that mountain at some point in our life, somewhere, somehow. It could happen with a cancer scare. It could facing an addiction, a bankruptcy, an unexpected divorce, the loss of a loved one, a life-altering tragedy, a pandemic, or some deep reflection in your life, or maybe a combination of all of those. And we begin to take the other journey, the journey down, the journey into our soul and into the person that we are meant to be. And my whole premise and bottom line is, we need the world to find that authentic self. That's what you're here for. That is ultimately your purpose, is to bring that authentic self forward and enrich the communities and the workplaces and the families that you serve and love, and bring that authentic self out. Let's not, this is a divided time. We can be divided politically, and that's just a defense. It's against our own pain. As we say, abuse and rage is simply what we do when we don't know what to do with our suffering. If we could come together and support each other through the emotions, through the realness of the emotion, then we can begin to heal and come back to ourselves. Cracked Open is finding your authenticity in the adversity. Embrace the hard stuff. Don't run away from the hard stuff. That is the doorway to your soul. That's the doorway to who you are. See difficulty as a doorway, okay? Defining moments. Here's some of my own defining moments. Surviving and facing polio when I was 4, facing a crisis of faith in my 20s, facing the darkness of trauma, addiction, a clinical depression in my 30s, walking my brother Hal through his cancer journey in my 50s, and growing through this pandemic in my 60s. These are some defining moments that at the time I would call them a crisis. But in light of time's perspective, I can look back and say these were actually defining moments that were guiding me to my authentic self. The authentic journey embraces time of great difficulty, allowing the pain to break us open so that a stronger, wiser, and kinder self can emerge. The authentic journey views adversity as something wanting to be born. You can take a look at any one of those chapters in this transformation of this caterpillar, and you could say that mushy chapter 2, that, send it to some psychotherapy, which I am not against whatsoever, but let's not pathologize it. Let's say, it's a necessary stage in the transformational journey, but you don't see it at the time. You don't see the big picture. You don't see the long view. What you see is momentary challenge, momentary adversity that you don't want to rescue people from. And when I don't want to get off on this tangent, but we don't want to rescue our children, our next generation from their unhappiness, because what we want to do is embrace them and support them through it, but don't put them in the driver's seat. Okay. All right. That's my end of my presentation. I want to again remind you to, if you want to get into this, if this speaks to you and you want to get into this material more deeply, you want to really understand, it's not a leadership training. Typically, leadership training has to do with what your leadership practices are. This is about leadership presence, deepening that presence, that authentic presence, so that you can bring more of who you are to what you do. And then your SAGE forums are an ongoing peer mentoring group, support group that will support you and help hold you accountable in a confidential, life-changing experience where we have these forums where you meet once a month with a very close group of other difference makers who are committed to be authentic. All right, on that note, I am going to stop the recording.